The world was emerging from the grip of a once-in-a-century pandemic. Streets that had lain silent for months were coming back to life. Businesses that had shuttered were reopening, and people were tentatively embracing a new normal. Amidst this cautious optimism, there was a growing concern that lurked beneath the surface: inflation. In the heart of New York City, the financial hub of the world, Emily Walker, a seasoned economist, sat in her high-rise office overlooking the bustling streets below. She had been at the forefront of many financial crises, but this one felt different. The pandemic had brought about unprecedented challenges, and now, as economies reopened, a new threat was emerging. Across the Atlantic in London, Oliver Thompson, a senior analyst at the Bank of England, was also feeling the weight of the situation. He had spent countless hours poring over data, trying to make sense of the shifting economic landscape. The central banks had injected trillions of dollars into the economy to stave off a complete collapse during the pandemic, and now, the consequences of those actions were beginning to manifest. Inflation was rising. Prices of goods and services were climbing at a pace not seen in decades. The cost of living was becoming a pressing issue for many, and central banks around the world were grappling with the challenge of how to respond. Emily and Oliver, though separated by an ocean, found themselves connected by their shared mission: to understand and address the economic turbulence that lay ahead. They had both seen the devastation that unchecked inflation could cause, and they were determined to prevent a repeat of history. In Washington, D.C., the Federal Reserve was holding a crucial meeting. Jerome Powell, the chairman, was well aware of the stakes. The Fed had to strike a delicate balance between supporting the economic recovery and reining in inflation. Powell knew that any misstep could have far-reaching consequences. As the meeting began, Powell looked around the room at his colleagues. Each one brought a different perspective, and together they represented a formidable body of expertise. There was Lael Brainerd, known for her deep understanding of monetary policy, and Richard Clarida, a seasoned veteran of the economic trenches. They debated and deliberated, weighing the pros and cons of various policy options. Meanwhile, in Frankfurt, Christine Lagarde, the president of the European Central Bank, faced a similar challenge. The Eurozone was a complex entity, with member states at different stages of economic recovery. Lagarde knew that any decision made by the ECB would need to be carefully calibrated to address the diverse needs of the region. In Tokyo, Haruhiko Kuroda, the governor of the Bank of Japan, was also feeling the pressure. Japan had long struggled with deflation, and now, the specter of inflation was adding a new layer of complexity to the country's economic woes. As central bankers around the world grappled with these issues, the global financial community watched with bated breath. Investors, businesses, and everyday people were all keenly aware that the decisions made by these institutions would have a profound impact on their lives. Emily and Oliver continued their work, driven by a sense of duty and a deep understanding of the stakes involved. They knew that the tightening of monetary policies was a necessary step, but it was one fraught with risks. The road ahead was uncertain, and the margin for error was slim. In the coming months, the world would watch as central banks adjusted their policies in response to the inflationary pressures. It was a time of great uncertainty, but also one of great potential. The decisions made during this period would shape the future of the global economy, and the actions of a few key individuals would determine the path forward. As the sun set over the bustling cities of the world, Emily, Oliver, and their colleagues continued their work, driven by a shared commitment to steering the global economy through these turbulent times. They knew that the challenges were immense, but so too were the opportunities. And in the end, it was their collective effort that would make all the difference. Emily Walker knew the importance of numbers. As an economist, she had spent her career analyzing data, interpreting trends, and predicting economic outcomes. But the numbers she was seeing now were unlike anything she had encountered before. Inflation rates were climbing steadily, and the cost of living was becoming a serious concern for millions of people. Emily's office was filled with stacks of reports and data sheets. She sat at her desk, her brow furrowed in concentration as she pored over the latest figures. The data told a clear story. The massive influx of money into the economy during the pandemic had spurred a rapid increase in demand. But with supply chains still recovering and production capacities strained, prices were rising faster than anticipated. The signs were everywhere. At the grocery store, the price of basic necessities like milk and bread had jumped significantly. Gas prices were soaring, making it more expensive for people to commute and travel. Even the housing market was feeling the effects, with rents and home prices skyrocketing in many areas. The pressure was mounting, and people were feeling it in their wallets. Across the Atlantic, Oliver Thompson was facing a similar situation. The Bank of England's data was showing alarming trends. Inflation in the UK was hitting levels not seen in decades. The price of fuel in particular was a major driver of inflation. With energy costs rising, the impact was being felt across the economy, from manufacturing to transportation to consumer goods. Oliver knew that the Bank of England had to act, but the challenge was how to do so without derailing the fragile economic recovery. The central bank's primary tool for controlling inflation was to raise interest rates, but higher interest rates could also slow down economic growth by making borrowing more expensive for businesses and consumers. As Oliver sat in his office, he thought about the potential consequences of their actions. Raising interest rates too quickly could lead to a recession, but failing to act could allow inflation to spiral out of control. It was a delicate balancing act, and the stakes were incredibly high. In Frankfurt, Christine Lagarde was also grappling with the inflation dilemma. The Eurozone was a unique entity, composed of multiple countries with varying economic conditions. Some member states were recovering quickly, while others were still struggling. The European Central Bank had to find a policy that would work for all of them, and that was no easy task. Lagarde was keenly aware of the political implications of their decisions. Inflation was a highly sensitive issue, and public perception could quickly turn against the central bank if people felt that their needs were not being addressed. The ECB had to communicate its actions clearly and effectively, ensuring that people understood why certain measures were being taken. In Tokyo, Haruhiko Kuroda was monitoring the situation closely. Japan's economy had long been plagued by deflation, and the current inflationary pressures were a new challenge. Kuroda and his team were working to develop strategies that would address the rising prices without stifling economic growth. They knew that any misstep could have long-lasting consequences for Japan's economy. As central bankers around the world faced these unprecedented challenges, the financial markets were reacting. Investors were closely watching the actions of the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, and the Bank of Japan. Stock markets were volatile, with prices swinging wildly in response to economic data and policy announcements. Emily and Oliver continued their work, communicating regularly with their colleagues and counterparts. They shared insights, discussed potential strategies, and debated the best course of action. They knew that their decisions would have far-reaching impacts, and they were determined to get it right. The early warning signs of inflation were clear, and the need for action was urgent. Central banks were preparing to tighten their monetary policies, but the road ahead was fraught with challenges. As they navigated this complex landscape, Emily, Oliver, and their colleagues remained focused on their mission: to steer the global economy through this turbulent period and ensure a stable and prosperous future for all.